Have you ever stopped to actually think about how you decide to trust someone?
Oh, that is a big question right off the bat.
I mean, it really is. Is it like just a gut instinct? Or maybe it's a shared vulnerability?
For a highly calculated risk management strategy, like almost mathematical.
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into what I'd call the ultimate invisible infrastructure of human existence, you know? Trust.
It is the bedrock of everything, and we have an incredible lens to view it through today.
We really do.
Okay.
We are exploring the life and work of Manuel del Valle Colón. Specifically, we're looking at a massive volume of his work, published in April 2026.
Right. Omnibus Poetry LX6, which translates to Volume 66, and it's simply titled Trust.
Which is just, I mean, 66 volumes of poetry is staggering. But the guy wasn't just sitting in a cabin writing all day. He wrote these poems after spending decades fighting for trust in federal courtrooms.
And spy schools, apparently.
Yeah, we'll definitely get the spy schools.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to map the anatomy of trust using a really fascinating stack of sources.
We've got the poetry itself, of course, but also deep biographical records, legal histories, and some pretty incredible personal tributes.
Tributes from some of the most influential legal minds of the last century, actually. So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it. Because to understand his poetry, you have to realize that Manuel de Valle Colón wasn't insulated from the world. He was a pragmatist.
Right, he operated on this unbelievable scale.
Exactly. He understood human interaction from the absolute highest macro levels of federal civil rights law all the way down to a whispered conversation between two friends in the rain.
I love that contrast.
Yeah.
He translated the human soul in his art, but he also did the grueling, unglamorous work of forcing real-world institutions to be trustworthy.
And that real-world grounding begins in a very specific place and time. To understand how he defines trust, we really have to look at the architecture of his early life.
Let's start there. So, October 1948, New York City. He was born in East Harlem. His parents migrated from Puerto Rico. His father from the town of Hatillo and his mother from Mocha. And by the time he's 9 years old, they moved to the Douglas Projects.
On the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Yeah. And if you picture New York City in the 1950s, especially for a Puerto Rican family, navigating public housing trust is not some philosophical luxury.
Oh, absolutely not. It's a daily survival calculation.
Exactly.
You have to remember the post-war era in New York was defined by massive demographic shifts. And you have this deeply entrenched bureaucratic machine running the city.
Right. So growing up in a massive complex like the Douglas Projects, you are immediately confronted with systems.
You see very clearly who the city services protect and who they just manage or ignore entirely.
Yeah, that teaches a kid early on that society isn't necessarily going to welcome you with open arms.
The infrastructure around you, the schools, the housing authorities, the policing, they often view you with suspicion.
So for Manuel, trust wasn't a given. It had to be heavily scrutinized.
Exactly. He navigates the local public schools, PS 72 and PS 179, and he clearly thrives intellectually because in 1962, he tests into Brooklyn Technical High School.
Which is a huge deal. Brooklyn Tech is not just a regular high school. It's one of the elite specialized testing schools in New York.
It is an absolute pressure cooker of intellect and competition.
But the biographical records show he isn't just sitting in the back taking notes. He immediately starts organizing.
Right. He joins the Free World Club, and he gets involved with the polling squad.
Which I found fascinating. He's literally taking the temperature of the city on local elections as a teenager.
He is learning the mechanics of civic engagement early on, but the most critical step he takes is getting deeply involved in Aspera.
Okay, for listeners who might not know New York's civic history, what is Aspera?
Well, it was founded in 1961 by Antonia Pantoja. She is an absolute titan of community organizing, and the whole purpose of Aspera was to develop the educational and leadership capacity of Puerto Rican and Latino youth.
And they weren't just doing math tutoring, right?
Right. No, not at all. They were teaching systemic power dynamics. And Manuel actually becomes the Issues and Actions chairman of the Aspire Club's federation.
Wow. So he's being mentored in the actual architecture of advocacy as a high schooler.
Precisely. Which sets up everything he does next.
Right. And I want to introduce an analogy here.
Yeah.
Because looking at his path from Brooklyn Tech to a transitional year at Yale and then to Wesleyan University in 1967, it's so easy to call it a pull yourself up by your bootstraps story.
Which completely misses the point.
It totally misses the point. Manuel wasn't just a smart kid who walked through exclusive Ivy League doors. He was a system architect.
I get that.
He didn't just quietly slip into the room. He walked through the door, propped it open with a cinder block and built structural ramps for everyone else in his community to follow him.
That is a great analogy, but I'll take it a step further. He didn't just prop the door open. He actively laid down a permanent legal and financial foundation so the institution could never close that door again.
Right. And the mortar he used was institutional funding.
Exactly. When he gets to Wesleyan in 1967, he looks around. There is no formalized Latino community. The institution just hasn't built a space for them.
So instead of just complaining, he drafts a comprehensive proposal.
And he secures a major grant from the Ford Foundation to build it himself.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. He is a college student in the late 1960s.
Yeah.
Massive national unrest is happening everywhere. And he somehow convinces the Ford Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world, to hand him a grant to alter the demographics of a prestigious university.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
How does that even work mechanically?
Well, it works because he understood the language of institutions. He didn't just go to the Ford Foundation and say, hey, we feel left out.
Right.
He presented a structural deficit. He showed them that elite institutions were failing to cultivate leadership from a rapidly growing demographic, and he offered a programmatic solution.
He brought data to a feelings fight.
Exactly. He used the grant money to plan conferences, push the Wesleyan administration to recruit more Latino faculty, and actively recruit Puerto Rican students from New York high schools.
He understood that institutions only trust data, funding, and organized pressure.
And the results were wild. The sources show he helped bring in a record number of Latino men to the 1969 to 1970 class.
And he spends his summer working with administrators to found the Eugenio Maria de Hostos Wesleyan Club. He literally alters the architecture of the campus.
But then he transfers to Princeton in 1969.
And instead of coasting, he just hits repeat.
He majors in history, Latin American studies, and Afro-American studies. And just like at Wesleyan, he immediately founds the Latino organization on Princeton's campus.
Right, and he pushes the university to approve one of the first seminars in the Ivy League on the history and politics of Puerto Rico.
He is constantly forcing these centuries-old institutions to expand their intellectual borders.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because this part just blew my mind. He's at Princeton, he's in his early 20s, and he has to write a senior thesis.
Right.
He writes it on the history of Puerto Rican student and public education from 1945 to 1969. Now, normally, a college thesis gets graded, put in a drawer, and nobody ever looks at it again.
But not Manuel's.
No. One of the chapters of his thesis is actually incorporated into a memorandum for U.S. Senator Jacob Javits. It literally becomes part of the congressional record in a U.S. Commission on Civil Rights hearing in 1972.
It is such a phenomenal achievement.
And it becomes the blueprint for the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund to frame a massive federal civil rights complaint.
This is the perfect example of how his early life defined his concept of trust. Think about the mechanics of a civil rights lawsuit.
You can't just say a system is unfair.
Exactly. You have to prove it empirically. You need historical data, demographic trends, documented evidence of systemic failure. Manuel's thesis provided the rigorous academic bedrock that lawyers needed.
He proved the New York Board of Education was failing its students. He provided the ammunition to mandate institutional trust.
So we have this young man who spent his early 20s socially engineering trust on Ivy League campuses. But a university is a relatively small sandbox.
Right, no matter how prestigious it is.
Yeah.
So what happens when he takes those blueprints and applies them to an adversary that is massive, entrenched, and aggressively untrustworthy?
Well, in 1971, he heads to Yale Law School. And things escalate dramatically.
To say the least.
The environment at Yale Law in the early 1970s is crucial context here. He graduates in the class of 1974. And if you look at the records of that specific class, it is a crucible of modern American legal philosophy.
He's sitting in constitutional law classes debating alongside people who will literally shape the country.
The sources explicitly mention he graduated alongside Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guinier.
Which is just, pause and imagine the historical gravity of that room. You have future titans of vastly different legal and ideological philosophies.
You really do.
And obviously, we aren't taking sides or evaluating their politics here. We're just looking at the source material. But you have the seeds of originalist, conservative legal thought that Justice Thomas would champion, right next to the foundational ideas of critical race theory and voting rights reform that Lonnie Guinier would develop.
It's a remarkable historical cross-section. And it emphasizes the range of intellectual pressure Manuel was operating under.
Right, because when you are surrounded by minds trying to deconstruct and rebuild the legal system from completely opposing viewpoints, you realize quickly that trust cannot be partisan.
Exactly. If you want to build institutional trust, it has to hold up under the most rigorous scrutiny from all sides of the political spectrum.
And even in the middle of this intense environment, he doesn't stop building communities. He's running a parallel career.
He's teaching undergraduate courses on Puerto Rican history. He found another organization called Despierta Boricua.
The records even note his students at Yale included future judges and civil rights leaders. He is constantly mentoring,
laying the next layer of the foundation. And the moment he graduates, he takes all that theory straight into the trenches.
He starts working as a trial attorney with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund.
And this is where the plot comes full circle. He starts working on the lawsuit, Aspira versus Board of Education of the City of New York.
The exact lawsuit his Princeton thesis helped frame.
Yes. And the mechanism of this lawsuit is entirely about establishing a birthline of trust between the state and the citizen.
Break that down for us. What was the situation before this lawsuit?
Imagine you're a child arriving in New York from Puerto Rico, or you're born to Spanish-speaking parents in the city. You're placed in a public school classroom where instruction is entirely in English. You literally cannot understand the teacher.
Right.
Furthermore, the system administers IQ and aptitude tests in English. When the children inevitably score poorly because they can't read the test, the system labels them as having learning disabilities.
Or tracks them into lower-tier educational pathways. That is horrifying.
It is.
If you're a parent watching that happen to your kid, what does that do to your baseline trust in society? The system isn't just failing to educate. It's weaponizing a language barrier to label a child as deficient.
The system was fundamentally untrustworthy because it demanded compliance without offering comprehension.
Wow.
The outcome of the Aspira lawsuit was a landmark consent decree. And for listeners who aren't lawyers, a consent decree isn't just a polite agreement.
It's a binding agreement approved by a judge, right?
Yes. The Board of Education was legally forced to provide bilingual education to limited English-speaking children in New York. Manuel helped engineer a legal mechanism that forced an untrustworthy system to change its behavior.
Under the threat of federal penalty.
Exactly.
He also worked on cases ensuring unemployment notices were provided in Spanish, which seems so basic now, but it is incredibly profound.
Because you cannot trust a government that sends you life-altering financial notices in a language you can't read.
Exactly. By forcing the state to translate those documents, he's demanding that the government actually look at citizens in the eye.
This relentless drive to hold bureaucracies accountable defines his whole legal career. He becomes a trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Labor. He studies at the London School of Economics.
And he eventually becomes the chief administrative law judge of the New York State Division of Human Rights.
The sources point out he was the first Puerto Rican ever to hold that position.
And he steps into it during a very volatile time, the late 1980s and early 1990s. The records note that as chief judge, he prioritized racial harassment, sexual harassment, and AIDS discrimination cases.
Think about the societal context of AIDS in that era. It was a time of immense public panic and stigma.
People were being fired from jobs, evicted, denied medical care.
Simply based on a diagnosis. For an administrative law judge to make those cases a priority is a massive statement about who deserves the protection of the law.
It's about who gets to trust the system. If society is actively panicked by your existence, will the legal system still protect your humanity? He was saying, yes, the law still applies to you.
And he finishes his legal career serving 16 years as an administrative law judge for the Social Security Administration in San Juan, Puerto Rico. 10 of those as chief judge.
Now, a judge in the Social Security system is often the final backstop for people fighting the state over disability benefits or retirement claims.
It is an arena where the power dynamic is inherently skewed. A single vulnerable citizen against the infinite resources of the federal government.
His job was to ensure the process was fair, transparent, and trustworthy.
We have two incredible tributes in the source material that really crystallize this impact. First, a deeply moving reflection from Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo.
Yes, Dr. Ibarrondo talks about his childhood, noting his parents only had second-grade educations, but they taught him to question everything.
He had all these raw, angry questions about his colonized education in Harlem, but then he gets to Fordham University and Manuel del Valle is his professor.
And Dr. Ibarrondo says Manuel became the bridge. Manuel didn't dismiss the questions of a kid from Harlem. He honored them.
He taught him how to conceptualize law and history, how to take that raw anger and mold it into a professional academic discipline.
To use his intellect as a tool for systemic change.
The second tribute is an inscription in a book from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
She wrote, "Manuel, you are my first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change. Thank you for all you have done for so many and for what you continue to do."
When you look at the breadth of his influence, from empowering a young student at Fordham to serving as the first role model for a future Supreme Court justice, it's staggering.
It really is. The historical reality is that Manuel navigated and influenced an incredibly wide spectrum of legal minds.
By maintaining an unyielding focus on equity and access, he spent decades demanding institutions honor the humanity of the people they serve.
So we have this system, architect, federal judge, civil rights pioneer. He spent a lifetime wrestling with vast bureaucracies. But then we see this incredible pivot.
The pivot to poetry.
Yes. Parallel to his legal career, he's a poet. And in his poetry, he turns completely away from federal mandates. He turns inward.
He asks the ultimate question. The law can force a school board to provide bilingual education, but how do two human beings actually find trust within themselves and with each other?
This transition from the courtroom to the page is where his exploration of trust reaches its most profound depths. And the sheer scale of his literary output is just. It mirrors his legal career.
The Omnibus poetry series?
It is 66 volumes of poetry. I honestly had to read that number twice in sources. 66 volumes.
It is a monumental achievement in creative discipline.
So what does this all mean? Why 66 volumes? It feels like he is attempting an encyclopedic mapping of the entire human experience, like categorizing every single iteration of joy, pain, and vulnerability.
And our focus today is specifically on volume Lxvi, volume 66, published in April 2026. The title is simply Trust.
But right from the cover, you see his perspective is entirely global.
The dedication is fascinating. He thanks his teachers of Thai, Chinese, and Japanese for expanding his linguistic, cultural, and spiritual vocabulary.
And the title Trust isn't just printed in English. It's presented in Chinese as Jiangjin, in Japanese as Shinrai, and in Thai is Cheksman.
He is immediately signaling that trust is not a monolith. You cannot understand it merely through the lens of Western philosophy or the English language.
By presenting it across multiple linguistic frameworks, he's arguing that trust is a polyglot experience. Every language carries different cultural baggage and nuances regarding what it means to rely on someone.
He is asking you to view trust through a multifaceted prism, and he lays out his thesis very clearly in the preface.
He defines what trust actually is and what it isn't. He doesn't describe trust as some magical, warm feeling that just washes over you.
No, he describes it as a calculated, deliberate decision. It is an operational mechanism. He writes that trust is a decision that allows relationships to form, knowledge to function, societies to operate, and individuals to move forward.
Notice the active verbs there. And he argues that without this deliberate decision to trust, we are left with a terrifying alternative.
He writes that without trust, you are left with a world of suspicion or surveillance, where one is unable to function independently and is subject to another's or society's control.
That line gave me chills. Trust or surveillance. Those are the only two options.
And coming from a former judge who spent decades looking at how the state monitors its citizens, that observation carries immense weight.
He knows exactly what a society built on suspicion looks like.
So in volume 66, he breaks trust down into specific themes. Trust as performance. Trust as the acceptance of ambiguity, the integration of the shadow, cognitive anchors, and risk management.
I want to dive right into the actual poetry, because this is where all these abstract concepts become incredibly visceral. Let's look at what I'm calling the paradox of trust.
Let's lay out the two poems.
So the first one is a deeply intimate, heartbreaking poem about two brothers. One of the brothers is legally blind.
And the poem details how he navigates his house entirely by touch and memory. He refuses to be pitied.
Right, he walks barefoot to feel the texture of the floorboards. He goes into the kitchen, taking ketchup from the cupboard, juice from the fridge, relying on the physical shape of the bottles and tasting the food to ensure it's correct.
The sensory detail establishes a baseline of physical vulnerability. He has to trust his environment absolutely, because a single misplaced object is a hazard.
Eventually, he hires a young caretaker to assist him. But the way he interviews this caretaker is so revealing. He doesn't grill him on a resume.
He makes the caretaker read aloud to him.
Why? because the blind brother believes he can hear the presence or absence of trust in the specific cadence and tone of the caretaker's voice.
He is relying on an intensely honed intuition. His physical limitation forced him to develop a heightened sensitivity to the authenticity of human interaction.
The caretaker reads him a story about two princes, one blind, one sighted, who do everything together, and then the poem delivers this devastating revelation.
We learn that the blind man's sighted brother died in an accident, and his retinas are harvested and donated to give the blind brother the ability to see.
When the blind brother realizes this, that his own dead brother literally gave him sight, he breaks down. He realizes his brother was his greatest teacher and vows to live the rest of his life honoring that immense sacrifice.
It is a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. This is trust born of absolute necessity and profound sacrificial love.
The blind brother's survival required him to be completely open, and ultimately, he receives the ultimate act of biological and spiritual trust from his sibling.
It is organic and beautiful, but Manuel then hits us with an aggressive thematic whiplash.
Yes, because hold that vulnerable organic image in your mind. The very next theme we encounter is a poem about a spy college.
A completely different world.
In the spy college poem, students are learning intensive human anatomy, but not to heal people. They're learning anatomy so they can hide micro-listening devices in body orifices.
They are experimenting with physical positions to conceal technology, learning the latest measures and countermeasures of espionage.
The poem explores how these spies in training must have absolute unwavering trust in their instructors to teach them the ultimate arts of deception.
He is placing the highest form of organic trust right next to the highest form of weaponized trust.
I really struggled with this juxtaposition at first. I kept thinking, is the spy college really about trust, or is it just mutually assured destruction?
How did you reconcile it?
It feels like comparing a greenhouse to a concrete bunker.
Yeah.
The greenhouse, the blind brother, requires being entirely open, letting the light in, risking the glass breaking because growth requires vulnerability.
Right.
But the bunker, the spy college, requires knowing every single structural weakness and blind spot just so you can armor it and exploit it in the enemy.
Your instinct to contrast the greenhouse and the bunker is exactly what Manuel wants you to do. Let's unpack the paranoia versus organic trust. To become a master spy, to learn how to never trust anyone ever again, you must first undergo a period of extreme, absolute trust in your instructor.
Oh, wow, I see it.
You have to allow them to map all of your physical and psychological vulnerabilities so they can teach you how to hide them. Both the blind brother and the spy demand an exhaustive mapping of human frailty.
So trust is just a tool. It's a mechanism. It can open your heart to your family or it can wiretap a foreign embassy. It is completely morally neutral until human intent is applied to it.
Precisely. And this exploration of intense physical vulnerability naturally forces us to look at emotional vulnerability. How do we handle the parts of our psychology that we are terrified to show the world?
This brings us to a psychological concept that features heavily in the poetry: the shadow.
When Manuel talks about the shadow, he is pulling directly from Carl Jung. And for listeners who might not be deep into psychoanalysis, the shadow isn't just a metaphor for being sad.
Right, it's not just feeling down.
No, in Jungian psychology, the shadow is the unconscious part of the personality that the conscious ego does not want to identify in itself. It is the repository for all the parts we repress.
Our anger, our greed, our shame, our weird quirks.
The stuff we shove into the basement of our minds because society tells us it's unacceptable.
Which makes the shadow poem so fascinating, because the imagery is incredibly joyful and subversive.
The narrator of the poem decides that it's the beginning of spring, and it's time to invite his shadow to experience life in the broad sunlight of truth.
He literally takes his shadow to the riverbank. They play soccer together. They walk up and down the school stairwells side by side.
And when the narrator plays drums in the school band, his sturdy shadow is right there, wearing the exact same clothes, taking everything in stride.
He's arguing that you cannot fundamentally trust another human being if you are actively at war with yourself.
Exactly.
But wait, I need to push back on this poem, though. The imagery is fun, playing soccer with your dark side. But isn't there a severe danger in celebrating our toxic traits?
How do you mean?
How does Manuel differentiate between accepting your psychological shadow and just excusing bad behavior? If my shadow is angry and selfish, bringing it into the sunlight sounds like a recipe for hurting the people around me.
That is the crucial distinction, and it's a brilliant question. He isn't saying you should let your shadow drive the car.
Right.
He is saying you have to bring it into the sunlight of truth. What happens to mold when you expose it to direct sunlight?
It dies.
Yes. If you keep your anger and shame hidden in the dark, it festers, it grows, and it controls your behavior subconsciously. You lash out without knowing why. By
Right.
acknowledging it, by walking with it in the daylight, you neutralize the shame. You are saying, I see this part of myself, I accept it exists, but I am not controlled by it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The deception is what destroys trust. If I am hiding my shadow from you, I am presenting a fake version of myself.
Yeah.
And you can't build a real relationship on a fake foundation.
Exactly. Once you harmonize your internal landscape, you have the capacity to harmonize with others, which transitions us beautifully into one of the most striking external metaphors in the book.
The Piano Boy poem. This poem has my favorite imagery in the entire collection.
It's beautiful.
It's about a little boy who is playing the piano to honor his grandmother's memory. She loved a very specific, soft, gentle melody. And to ensure he plays it perfectly, the little boy uses his imagination.
He imagines a tiny, fragile little person living inside the piano keys making the sounds. So he has to strike the keys incredibly gently so he doesn't hurt the little person inside.
It is a breathtaking way to conceptualize empathy. He's anthropomorphizing the instrument to enforce a physical boundary of gentleness.
But the poem introduces a sharp conflict. The boy is performing on stage, and he is accompanied by a violinist.
A much older violinist who brings all of this toxic, abrasive adult drama to the stage. She's deliberately playing her violin harshly and shrilly, specifically because she wants to make her boyfriend in the audience jealous.
We have a direct clash of energies here. The pure, empathetic trust of the boy, colliding with the harsh, performative manipulation of the violinist.
And the way the boy handles it is a masterclass in psychological de-escalation. He doesn't panic. He doesn't bang harder on the piano keys to drown her out.
He doesn't speed up his tempo to finish the song faster.
No, he simply maintains his gentle, soft melody. He takes his time. He trusts his own music.
And by playing so consistently and gently, he forces the violinist to adapt. She realizes she sounds ridiculous being so shrill against his softness. She loses her harshness and has to blend her sound to match his melody.
Think about Manuel's background as a judge. How many times do you think he sat in a courtroom while two opposing sides screamed at each other, trying to escalate the tension?
Oh, probably countless times. The boy's tactic in the poem is the ultimate tool of a seasoned arbiter. You don't fight harshness with harshness.
By maintaining your own authentic, centered space, you disarm the abrasive parts of the world.
You invite the chaos to calm down and meet you in harmony, but it takes immense confidence to hold that space.
It really does. And it leads us directly into how Manuel views the everyday, mundane construction of trust. Because trust isn't usually built in grand cinematic moments on a stage. It's built in tiny rituals.
He spends a significant portion of Volume 66 focusing on trust as ritual, pattern, and cognitive anchor. He's interested in the invisible architecture of friendship.
We see this in the poem about the scholar and the athlete. These are two high school kids who skip school to go to a spring festival.
They are eating Chinese food on a rooftop, moving at breakneck speed, sharing a single pair of earbuds to listen to music.
The dynamic is beautifully balanced. The scholar helps the athlete pass his classes, and the athlete introduces the scholar to a social circle so he isn't a lone wolf anymore. And while they are at the festival, they buy these cheap little bracelets, one red, one light blue.
And the emotional weight of the poem hinges on what happens to those bracelets over time. The poem reveals that they continue to wear those cheap fraying bracelets well into their adulthoods, even wearing them into their marriages.
It is such a universally relatable concept. Everyone has that cheap bracelet friend. The physical object itself is completely worthless, but the ritual it represents, the shared history, the inside jokes, the mutual support is priceless.
The bracelet is the load-bearing pillar of the relationship. We see this concept of ritualized trust again in the poem about catching rain.
Two school friends are leaving a pagoda-style restaurant late on a rainy night. One friend admits that the sound of the rain makes him feel less lonely, so he steps out from the awning, reaches out, and captures the rain in his cupped hands.
The second friend watches this, stand up, puts his own hands together, and physically takes the pooled rain from his friend's hands. He says, "If you can trust in the rain, you can trust in me."
They're essentially creating a shared fiction on the spot. It's a poetic game. But by participating in the ritual together without mocking each other, they solidify a very real bond.
And we see a more humorous version of shared struggle in the Eagle Scouts poem.
Yes, these two scouts have all the badges, all the theoretical knowledge, But they're still out in the woods, struggling miserably to set up a tent and start a fire in terrible weather.
They have dirty faces, they are exhausted, they have to take freezing cold showers, but they bond over the absurdity of their failure. The shared suffering strips away their ego, leaving only trust.
These are the joyful, lighthearted foundations of trust. But Manuel doesn't shy away from the dark side of interpersonal dynamics. He severely contrasts these mundane rituals with the incredibly heavy rituals required to break generational cycles of trauma.
The pivot here is stark. We move to a deeply analytical poem about a divorced mother and her son.
This poem is heavy. The mother and son have this unspoken pact that the boy will not grow up to be like his abusive father.
But the poem explicitly dissects the manipulative tactics the mother uses to control the son. It specifically warns against the mother using guilt manifested through sudden theatrical crying and tearing up to control his behavior.
To induce guilt over her own failed relationship?
It is a devastating psychological observation about the weaponization of emotion. There is no rational discussion that can occur after a parent uses tears as a weapon of guilt.
It completely short-circuits logic and demands emotional submission. Trust absolutely cannot exist where emotional manipulation is the primary tool of communication.
The poem outlines what the son has to do to survive this dynamic. It states that trust requires surpassing a history of misunderstandings to break the cycle. The son has to create a future that is tolerant of familial failings.
Which means the ultimate form of trust in this scenario isn't trusting the mother, it is trusting himself.
Exactly. He has to trust his own perception of reality enough to recognize the manipulation, and he has to trust his own moral compass enough to refuse to pass that trauma on to the next generation. That is a monumentally heavy psychological lift.
It really is. It's not catching rain in your hands, it's catching decades of generational trauma and deciding it stops with me. And doing that requires setting ironclad boundaries.
Which Manuel explores in the final sections of the book, alongside what you could call the mathematics of trust.
The mathematical poem is a brilliant synthesis of his global perspective. He provides the reader with a literal numerical toolkit designed to combat anxiety. The sequence is 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7.
The first time I read that, I thought it was just a random string of numbers.
Right. But the way he breaks it down based on Eastern philosophy is fascinating. He divides the numbers into yin and yang. The odd numbers 1, 5, 7 are the yang, the active, bright, masculine energy.
And the even numbers 4, 2, 8 are the yin, the receptive, dark, feminine energy. Let's look at the mechanics of the specific numbers. He assigns a developmental stage of life to each digit.
Number 1 represents the beginning, the self, the origin.
Number 4 represents death or endings.
Number 2 represents pairing up, forming a relationship with the other.
Number 8 represents prosperity, expansion, and infinite loops.
Number 5 represents finding balance, much like the 5 elements of traditional Chinese medicine that govern the body.
And finally, number 7 represents mystery, spirituality, the things we cannot know.
He writes that when you feel overwhelmed by anxiety, when your trust in the world is fracturing, you should literally recite these numbers. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7.
Or write them down on a piece of paper. The physical act functions as a cognitive anchor for the nervous system. By reciting the numbers, you are reminding your brain of the inevitable cyclical nature of the universe.
You begin alone, you face endings, you connect, you expand, you balance, and you accept the unknown. You are trusting the process of life itself. It relaxes the physiological tension of the mind. It's such an incredibly practical, tangible tool.
It demonstrates that trust can be an entirely internal, self-regulated mechanism. You don't always need another person to establish trust. Sometimes you just need to establish trust with the flow of time and the architecture of the universe.
And he builds on this complex, multifaceted view in the layered reality poem. He describes the act of trusting someone as being similar to peeling the layers of an opinion. You have to analyze the visual layer, the intellectual layer, and the emotional layer.
He discusses how listening is an active, interpretive process in a polyglot world. You are constantly translating not just languages, whether that is Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, or German, but you are translating their emotional intent, their cultural context, and their history.
This poem serves as his proof that trust is never a monolith. It is not a light switch you can just flip on or off. It is a grueling, ongoing, interpretative process. You have to constantly translate the other person's reality to understand if they are truly trustworthy.
But amidst all of this incredible complexity, all of this nuance about shadows and polyglot translation and Eastern numerology, Manuel draws an absolute hard line in the sand regarding what trust is not.
This is the definitive moment of the text. After 66 volumes of exploring the endless ambiguities and gray areas of the human soul, the former judge bangs the gavel. He establishes the absolute boundaries required for trust to exist.
He writes, and I am quoting directly here, "There is no trust that can come from a slap in the face. There is no trust that can come from being yelled at repeatedly. There is no trust that can come from those seeking to silence you. There is no trust that can be born from those seeking to humiliate you."
Let's analyze the mechanics of why abuse destroys trust. Trust requires a baseline of physical and psychological safety. If someone is slapping you, yelling at you, or humiliating you, they are prioritizing their power over your safety.
They are demanding submission. You cannot organically trust a system or a person that requires you to surrender your dignity to survive them.
It all comes back to his life's work, doesn't it? The exact same logic applies across his entire timeline.
Right.
From fighting for bilingual education so children aren't humiliated by a school system they can't understand, to adjudicating human rights cases for AIDS patients facing societal panic, to writing poetry about a mother using tears to manipulate her son.
You cannot build a community, a legal system, or a family on a foundation of humiliation. Manuel del Valle y Colón understood that whether you are drafting a 50-page federal civil rights complaint or writing a 4-line poem about a little boy playing the piano, the ultimate goal is exactly the same.
To create an architecture where human beings can exist without fear. What an unbelievable journey we have covered today. We have traced the path of a man who started in the Douglas Projects in East Harlem, pushed his way through the doors of the Ivy League with a cinder block, reshaped the mechanics of federal civil rights law alongside titans of the Supreme Court, and then somehow found the time, the discipline, and the soul to write 66 volumes of poetry.
We've seen how he mapped the anatomy of trust in federal courtrooms, in the paranoia of spy colleges, in the shared laughter of a rainstorm, and in the mathematical rhythm of the numbers 1 through 7.
He truly was a master architect. He spent his youth building structures of justice and equity in the physical world, and he spent his later years building structures of emotional survival and meaning in the literary world.
So why should you, the listener, care about all of this? Why does a life from the 1960s or a book of poetry from 2026 matter to you right now?
Because we are living in an era of relentless information overload. We are swimming in an ocean of deep societal cynicism. Every time you open your phone, you are being told not to trust the news, not to trust the government, not to trust your neighbors.
But as Manuel's life proves, trust is the only mechanism we have to keep the suspension bridge of society from collapsing into pure surveillance and paranoia. You cannot just sit back and wait for trust to magically appear in your life. You have to be the architect.
You have to actively build the ramps, secure the foundation, and invite your own shadow out into the broad sunlight. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. I want you to think about the cheat bracelets in your own life.
What are the small, seemingly insignificant totems, the inside jokes, the shared foibles over a collapsed tent that secretly act as the load-bearing pillars of your deepest relationships?
If trust truly is a layered reality, as Manuel suggests, ask yourself this. Which layer of reality are you currently ignoring in the people closest to you? Because remember, trust is invisible until the moment it breaks. Make sure you know exactly what cables are holding you up, and make sure you are actively doing the work to maintain them.
A profound challenge to end on.
Until next time, keep exploring the depths.